Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming to talk to us about this very important case, and it's been occupying you, I know, for the past many months. And I want to start with the latest. I know you watched the hearing yesterday where Paul did not participate necessarily. I think he was participating via video link. What impression did you have of that?
Well, it's sort of interesting. These video appearances that have happened over the last 11 months are the only opportunity we have to hear Paul's voice. We are not allowed any phone calls with him, so we don't have very much contact with Paul at all. To be able to get up in the morning on these hearings and appeals and see him in person is very important to us. But I was not surprised after the previous hearing where he had spoken over the top of the judge very loudly. I thought that there might be retribution of some sort. And so I wasn't surprised to wake up and find that he had been only allowed to appear on video. Likewise, the way his statement was throttled to the media seemed like a retribution of some sort. It's very frustrating, and I'm sure very frustrating for Paul, to have this sort of thing happen. At least we know he's alive. That much we were able to tell from the video.
So this is basically, do you have any other channels of communication with him?
We have occasional communication via the consular staff that goes and visits. So when an embassy person from any of the 4 embassies is allowed to visit, which happens once or twice a month, we are able to give them short messages which they then can read to Paul. They're not allowed to give him anything in writing. Likewise, he can't give anything in writing back. So he will say a few sentences to be relayed to us in turn. And that is the extent of our communication, apart from letters. But the letters are what I would say, very vanilla. He has to get the letters out past the censors. He can't tell them anything that's really the letters can't contain anything that's really going on. They're just sort of a proof that he's okay and hanging in there. And then they take months and months to leave the prison because the investigator sits on them for as long as possible. They'll be released in batches. For example, when Ambassador Huntsman was going to go and visit at the beginning of October, all of a sudden a number of letters showed up the week before that. So it's an obvious manipulation, another attempt to isolate Paul, of which there have been many over the months. So
we heard from the embassy that they're concerned about the state of his health. Do you know anything about that, any details?
No, we don't know any details, and that is really part of the problem. He is obviously not doing well. When we saw that video, he looked extremely unwell. The embassy, the U.S. embassy staff is extremely concerned. But they have, although they've submitted numerous diplomatic notes, they have not been able to receive any medical records from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs about any visits by physicians from the prison that Paul has had. We do know that he has been seen by someone. That person spoke in Russian. Paul was not allowed to ask any questions, and he has no idea what the results are from that particular examination. We would very much like him to be seen by an English-speaking doctor, someone from outside the prison system, to evaluate what on earth is going on. Paul was due to have surgery at the beginning of January when he came back from Russia. It was not anything terrible. Hernia is something that's dealt with very easily. But we're now 11 months later. His health condition has been exacerbated by the weight loss, the stress. Evidently, there have been some altercations with the guards. And so it is hard to say what exactly is going on with him at the moment. He is refusing surgery because he does not want the prison surgeons operating on him. And we have not been told if there is a plan to deal with any emergency situation that might come up. How are they going to handle it if in the middle of the night Paul suddenly needs emergency surgery? So we're very concerned about that.
How are your parents?
It's extremely difficult for them. We're a relatively strong family, and we band together in times of trouble. But my parents have asked to sort of stay to the side of all of the advocating and other things that are going on. So we fill them in on all the details. Of course, they see the video, read the articles in the paper. The journalists are very useful in conveying to my parents what's going on. But it is difficult for them to be caught up in the media work that my brother David does, the advocacy work that I'm doing, and all the details of Paul's personal life that our other brother Andrew is handling. So I told my parents they have two jobs. One is to stay this side of the grass. They're to look after their health and make sure that they're in good shape when Paul comes back. And they're to do the same for the dog. Paul's dog, Flora, also needs to be this side of the grass and doing well. And that is their job. And if they do that, we can handle all of the other things that are going on.
So in your attempts to try to get Paul back, we know that his appeal was rejected yesterday again. Right. Do you feel that the case of Paul has been given enough attention on the official level? And who did you think helped the most at this point?
Gosh, that's a very good question. So this is my 11th trip down to D.C., and each time I come, I go and meet many different people. Some of them we've been in touch with from the beginning. Representative Haley Stevens, who is from Paul's district, Senator Gary Peters, and actually Michigan, all of the Michigan delegation in general. My representative Bill Keating from Massachusetts, and there are many others who have been from Congress who have been involved in helping and supportive of Paul. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, a House resolution was passed on his behalf. In the State Department, we have amazing support from consular affairs. The embassy personnel could not be better. They could not be more caring and trying harder for Paul. The Ambassador Huntsman, when he was there, did his very best to try to resolve the situation. And I'm sure if Deputy Secretary of State Sullivan, if he actually completes the nomination situation and he is sent out as an ambassador, I am sure he will also be very strongly supportive of Paul. We have then touched base with numerous other agencies and departments within government. Often I go and meet someone and they refer me to someone else. And so I end up trying to figure out who it is I need to talk to. Sometimes it is like the Kafka novel, The Castle, where I am constantly just trying to get inside the castle and people keep referring me around and I'm not quite there. But as time has gone on and more people are sure that Paul is not a spy, this is obviously a political hostage-taking scenario, I'm getting greater and greater support. As of yet, the administration has not been very outspoken at all about Paul. And this is somewhat disappointing. I was able to meet with the National Security Council and John Bolton in the middle of June, and we had a very substantive discussion and some good ideas were moved back and forth. Weeks later, he was no longer in the position, neither was Fiona Hill. And so what has happened is, it's like musical chairs. We meet with people, and then before we know it, they've either moved to a different chair or they've been kicked out for one reason or another. So I was becoming very frustrated, and I was frustrated at consular affairs because they were right there. It was immediate for me to say, oh, you guys, you should be doing more. And then I realized that was absolutely the wrong way to go about it. The State Department has been hollowed out. There have been these tit-for-tat kicking out of diplomats in Moscow. They're doing the best they can with the tools they have. And so my job now is to try to create a more whole government approach to helping Paul by going to these different agencies and trying to weave them together myself. Now, if Paul was called wrongfully detained by the American government, something called a fusion cell would be put in place where within government this would be happening by itself. But for reasons we don't understand, Paul has not been called wrongfully detained, and so I am having to run around creating our own fusion cell in order to advocate for Paul and to push for his release. And if that's how it has to be, then that's what I'm going to do. And sooner or later, these people are going to get very tired of seeing me, and they're going to do this themselves.
Elizabeth, so he has not, Paul is held without any evidence being presented. Are you hearing any news on that? Are you getting a sense of why it's going on? And
Yes.
is the Russian government elaborating to the American counterparts of what exactly is going on there?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't. So I'm Paul's oldest sister, and I'm down here as a family advocate, and I'm running around government, but I am not part of government. And so I am not in on any discussions that are actually going on between the State Department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have no idea what they're talking about. But we do know, and we have been anticipating for a while, that evidence would start leaking out into the press, as it has done in the last week or so. And what it is, we can't quite get a complete picture, but our understanding is that someone that Paul knew for 10 years or so set him up with a USB drive, and on that USB drive supposedly were state secrets. It seems that the prosecutor is trying to build a case around that, saying that because Paul had many friends in Russia that he had developed over time, that these were contacts he was trying to develop. And so what has happened are these little stories are popping up in the news, mostly on the Russian side, saying that Paul was developing contacts and seeking people out, and that he gave someone a book, that was supposed to convince them that they were going to spill Russian state secrets to him. It's facts covered with fiction in order to make a very salacious story. Most of the people who are Paul's contacts in Russia, we already know about his family. He would email and send us photos. We know who these people are. Surely if Paul was a spy, you don't send pictures of your contacts to your parents and talk about the trips you're taking or where you're having coffee together and that sort of thing. Likewise, this book was a recent present. We think Paul took it this past holiday to meet this friend. It's not... there's nothing mysterious about it, but we know that a disinformation campaign is a mixture of facts sprinkled liberally with fiction to create confusion or doubt in people's minds. And so we're expecting to see more of this. We have, however, told Paul, don't worry about this stuff. There's a 100% chance that you're going to be sentenced and convicted. That's how it works in Russia. The FSB most likely already knows how they want this trial to go. And so we are trying to tell him, no matter what ridiculous stories appear in the press, we here do not believe that you're a spy or that any of these other contacts you have made are spies. My parents themselves met some of these people when they were in Russia with Paul in 2009. That, once again, is not good spycraft to introduce your potential contacts to your parents.
So his multiple trips to Russia are being quoted as some kind of a suspicious evidence, or not an evidence, but something suspicious to attach to the case. What would you say to that? Just the general interest, or it's been, speculations are out in the air about that. What is your take?
Well, what these stories always miss is that Paul travels to many, many countries around the world. I have a refrigerator at home that is plastered with postcards from China, South Korea, India, Austria, all of the places where his company has physical plants that Paul has to go and visit. So travel is something Paul has done since he was 17. And when he travels, he likes to meet other people who work in law enforcement. When he was younger, he would, on his trip around Europe, he would go to every police station and they would exchange badges. It's something that police do. But this is part of how he maintains his friendships around the world. When I travel, I'm an artist. I go and look for other artists. I visit art museums. And for Paul, he has an interest in law enforcement, and so that is naturally the sort of person that he tends to seek out. Most of the trips he has taken have been either short trips where he was visiting another country and then sort of popped over to Russia for a few days to see it. But as in any country that you become familiar with, and he began to feel familiar with Moscow and comfortable there, he was pleased about that. He liked the fact that he knew some people in Russia. It's a little different. It's not what every American does. About 200,000 Americans a year do go and visit Russia, which is something that a lot of people don't know about. 400,000 Chinese a year go and visit Russia. So tourism is a big thing. But there's nothing nefarious about it. And his friends back here knew about his travels. His friend from the Marines, who had been married over here to a Russian woman and then was having a second wedding in Moscow, knew about Paul's travels to the extent that he said, "You know Moscow, could you please come and help me with the wedding party, because I'm going to have 10 to 15 Americans to shepherd around Moscow and show them the sights and the art museums and such, and I need some help." And that was the premise for Paul going to Moscow last December.
And this is when it all happened, and when he received allegedly the flash drive that contained those state secrets.
Right.
Oftentimes, Paul's four passports are being quoted in this speculative way as some kind of a suspicious evidence as well.
Right.
Your brother David told us that it was due to the nature of how your family was moving around, living around. Do you have four passports yourself, Elizabeth?
I have three. I never got a Canadian citizenship when we lived there, so Paul will always have more passports than I. So yes, my parents and I were born in England, and we moved to Canada, and my three brothers were born there. So from the minute they were born, they had two passports. And then in the 1970s, we moved to the United States, and over time, acquired American citizenship. And then what happened, I think it was around 2000, the Irish government decided that they were going to allow foreign-born citizens who had Irish grandparents to have Irish citizenship. And we thought we would like to honor our ancestry, and let's do that. And I think it's so wonderful that Paul has these four passports. How often can a person really do that? He's very unique in the ability to be able to have that. And it served him really well, because when he was jailed, of course they expect him to say, contact the U.S. Embassy. And he said, contact the U.S. Embassy and the Irish and the Canadian and the English. And we think that was a bit of a surprise to the Russians, actually.
So do you think that the U.S. Embassy was the most helpful, or other countries are helping as well?
Well, I shouldn't say most helpful, but of course someone has to decide who is going to be in charge. Paul was traveling on his U.S. passport, and so the way it is done in general is that country is then responsible for moving things forward. But the other countries, the embassies in Moscow of the other countries, have been extremely supportive of Paul. And when the Ministry of Foreign Affairs decides, oh no, we're not, for whatever reason, we're not going to let the U.S. see Paul at this time, one of the others will request to see him so that we can keep an eye on him, make sure he's still alive, get any messages to and from that we possibly can.
I know that he warned you and other siblings not to come to Russia to the hearing for the fear of your safety.
Right.
How serious do you think it is? Do you feel uncomfortable with going to Russia?
Well, I hate to say it, but yes. I mean, I was actually planning a trip to St. Petersburg before this happened. Paul and I were talking about, I as an artist, I so admire Russian artists. I was thrilled at the idea of possibly being able to go to the museums. Paul sent me a bunch of books on English and Russian, so I would know a few words, because I don't like to travel to another country without having a little bit of an idea of what's going on. But as of now, I don't think I will ever be able to go to Russia, because if they're going to be able to just snag Paul, who was there as a tourist, who is not a spy, who was set up by a person he thought was a friend, I don't feel at all that it's a good idea for us to go. And then secondly, Paul would worry. If he thought we were over there, he would worry. And who knows what the FSB would tell him. We might be just fine and enjoying ourselves, and they could be telling him that they were doing terrible things to us, or that they had locked us up. They could create psychological stress for Paul that is completely unnecessary. So I would rather sit here in the U.S. and complain about the fact that Paul has not been released, and I think for Paul's mental state, that is a better situation.
You mentioned hostage diplomacy. And I just wanted you to expand on that a little bit, because there obviously we don't know a lot, especially from the Russian side, especially because the state secrets are being quoted as a reason not to release evidence. What do you think they're trying to achieve in your mind, in what you've been hearing from different people, legal professionals, politicians as well in Washington?
Well, you know, this is what's so difficult. We have no idea exactly why Paul was taken. Like, what was the purpose? We know how he was set up, or we have a good idea, but we don't understand what the outcome was to be. We imagine, of course, that this is a political scenario that needs to be solved politically, because he's obviously not a spy. And this all of these hearings and this evidence, it seems like theater. We hear that it's judicial process, but the whole thing is just so ridiculous that we have to imagine that Paul is being held for some other reason. So what is that reason? No one seems to have a finger on it. Names of possible trades are bandied back and forth, but the family's position is that we don't really care how Paul gets back. I mean, if they wanted to fly him back in a little Sopwith Camel airplane, any way to get him back is fine with us. The State Department, the Department of Justice, the administration, they have to decide, and I hope they will use some creative thinking to try to figure out how to get Paul out of this situation. Likewise, the lawyer Zherbankov has said it's time for the four countries to start talking with Russia, and I would say the same goes the other way. It's time for the MFA to explain to the Americans what it is they're looking for. Let us start discussions. And part of that is, I get frustrated because, of course, I want someone to do something, but that's not how these diplomatic scenarios work. I don't have power, money, contacts, or anything myself that I can say, President Putin, I will trade you this thing and please release my brother. The only thing I can do is paint. And so I do not have a person I can trade for Paul, but I could say to President Putin, I can paint a painting of a person to trade with Paul. I could paint President Putin, I could paint someone from his family, I could paint President Trump and send a painting of President Trump to President Putin in exchange for Paul. That's the best I can do. And any other demands or requests are going to have to go from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the State Department. And it's frustrating that that's all I can do, but there it is.
So when they were talking about a spy swap,
right.
Maria Butina was here, and then she was sent to Russia, and for several months we've been hearing these mixed messages about possibly swapping Butina for Paul, but then there are legal contradictions there, because Butina was considered to be foreign agent here. Paul is being charged with spying with no evidence presented. Are you hearing from legal professionals on your side whether some kind of a legal resolution need to happen on the Russian end first to make this maybe possible swap, not with Butina, but with somebody else happen?
You know, this is another place where it's difficult for us to wade in. We haven't received legal advice here about that. It's more, most of us working on what I call Team Whelan didn't think that Butina was going to be traded for Paul. To begin with, Paul is not a spy. Paul is a tourist. He's not worth very much. I mean, I love him, he's my brother, but he's a very ordinary fellow. He doesn't have huge cachet. We're not necessarily going to say, oh, this person over here that Russia would like to have is equivalent to Paul. Also, this idea of a spy swap is something out of a novel. It is out of an espionage novel, like Jean le Carré, the swap on the bridge kind of thing. That does happen. Obviously, it has happened recently. But we never thought with Butina, we never thought that was going to be a case. It seemed to us also that perhaps the reason that Paul was originally arrested might have changed over time, that perhaps now they're thinking something different than they did before, but we don't know. We have none of that information. And so this is why we're saying not necessarily a trade or a swap or a spy swap or anything like that, because there are probably other creative ways to provide some sort of agreement between the two countries that would allow for Paul's release, that doesn't necessarily involve trading people. This is completely out of my wheelhouse to determine how and what that would be.
What Jerry Bankov has been saying lately, you mentioned that it might give some hope. He's saying that negotiations are necessary. Do you feel that the dynamics somehow have changed with that?
Well, you know, I do think that we're at a point where we do have to move forward. I think America is ready to talk to the MFA. I hope the MFA is ready to talk to the State Department. I believe that there are people on both sides who would like to have some discussion proceed. What that will be, I will probably never know. I will, you know, that's not my job. My job is to continue prodding everybody so that they don't forget about Paul, with all the other crazy things that go on in DC constantly, and to hope for some resolution sooner rather than later.
Speaking of things happening in D.C., you're making a statement today in Congress, and you've been there multiple times. But do you think a lot of attention is being drawn now to the impeachment hearing? Do you think this is distracting people from helping you?
Everyone in D.C. is tuned into the hearings, and there's no doubt about that. But I will say, and I was thinking about this on the train ride down here, you know, there are always those 20 people that you see from the House of Representatives and the Senate. They're always on television, and everyone knows their names. And then there are the other 400 and whatever people who aren't household names, senators and representatives who are working away every single day. There's all of these staff members who are working every day for America and working to get things done. There is bipartisan legislation being passed all the time. And so although everyone is tuned into C-SPAN and everybody's got the impeachment hearings everywhere, there is still regular work being done every day on Capitol Hill. And likewise, when it comes to Paul, none of the people that I interact with or who I've asked, you know, are you going to do something, or they've said, oh, we're going to have a meeting or whatever, none of those people have stopped doing the things that their interest has not fallen off because of this. It is a huge distraction, definitely. But I think people realize that Paul needs the help of the U.S. government. That is the only way, a political solution is the only way that this will be resolved.
Obviously, you would like to see Paul home for holidays. Do you think it's possible at all?
You know, we just can't count on that.
No.
I have a nasty feeling that that on purpose, Paul will not be home for the holidays. I think that I don't know exactly why, but I think that there's an element of trying to put pressure on the U.S. government, perhaps by making sure that he is not home for Thanksgiving and that he is not home for Christmas. It's too bad because, of course, Paul's family suffers, and so does Paul. But we're not the sort who are going to start weeping and wailing. In fact, it'll make us probably more annoying than ever.
Your brother David said that Paul is a fighter.
Yeah.
Is it coming from his past in the Marines, or how did this develop, and how do you think this is now being, I guess, showcased in his many months in prison, in the Russian prison?
I think when my parents moved from England to Canada and then to the United States, they did so in a way that was, they broke away from their families, not in a negative way, but they went out and did something new and adventurous. And from that example, our whole family has always felt that we can tackle big problems or big situations and take them on and succeed. I think perhaps some of that immigrant strength of being able to deal with adversity and to make a life for yourself and make things work out no matter what. I think that adapt and survive is a catchphrase for our entire family. And so I'm sure Paul's time in law enforcement and with the military has honed that. We know that he's had prisoner of war training and those sorts of things within the military experience. But I think in general, we're all relatively obstinate. We're going to hang in there and be stubborn, and we have a certain sense of patience, but we also want to get things done. I do not think Paul is going to just sort of collapse in a pool of, you know, of drama. Because of this. He is more likely to be aggravating the heck out of people and being very annoyed right now, if anything. And that kind of strength is going to help him get through this situation.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. Good luck to you, to your family. I just want to, maybe when we meet next time, I want to hear some good news from you and from your family. And again, thank you so much for giving this time to us to tell your story.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.